Today is Thursday, June 11th, 2026. An Israeli cargo ship stranded at sea for 5 days, circling off the coast of Tuscany because no one will let it dock. Ports in Genoa and Livorno locked down by human chains of workers, and millions of people flooding the streets of more than 80 Italian cities under one single battle cry, Blocchiamo tutto, let's block everything. Why? Why is Italy, a NATO country, a close ally of Washington, grinding itself to a halt? Because while the world was told a ceasefire had come to Lebanon, the bombs never stopped falling, and the Italian people, dock workers, students, train drivers, grandmothers, have decided they are done waiting for politicians to act. They are using the one weapon governments can't ignore, their own labor. And if you think this is just some local European drama, you're missing the bigger picture. This may be the loudest crack yet in the Western consensus on Israel. When the workers of a G7 country start physically blocking a war's supply chain with their own bodies, something fundamental has shifted. Today I'm going to show you exactly what's happening, the chain of events that lit this fuse, the Lebanon numbers that almost nobody is talking about, and one incident between Israeli soldiers and Italian troops that turned this from a protest into a national wound. Stay with me, because the deeper we go, the bigger this story gets. Let's start with the ports, because that's where this movement found its muscle. Italian dock workers, led by grassroots unions like USB and the big national union CGIL, have turned the country's harbors into checkpoints of conscience. In Livorno, the container ship Zim Virginia, owned by Israel's biggest shipping company, was left waiting off the coast for 5 straight days because workers refused to let it dock. In Genoa, another Zim vessel pulled away without loading a single container after 2,000 protesters surrounded the port. Workers there made a promise that went viral across Italy. If Israel attacked the aid flotilla heading to Gaza, quote, not one nail would leave their port, and they kept it. This isn't random anger, it's targeted. The dockers know something most protesters don't. Wars run on logistics, ships, containers, fuel, steel. You can chant outside a parliament for years and change nothing, but stop the cargo and suddenly everyone is paying attention. And it spread. This year, dock workers in more than 20 ports across the Mediterranean, Italy, Greece, Turkey, Morocco, the Basque Country, walked out together in a coordinated strike against arms shipments. One Greek union leader put it in words that are echoing across Europe. Ports are places of work, not war, places of sweat, not blood. Now, in a minute, I'm going to take you to Lebanon, because that's the fuse under all of this, and the numbers there are far worse than most people realize. But first, quickly, this channel runs on viewers, not sponsors, and stories like this one get buried fast. If you want independent coverage that follows the supply chains and reads the UN reports instead of the press releases, hit subscribe right now. It takes 1 second and it genuinely decides whether this kind of reporting survives. Okay, let's keep going. To understand why ordinary Italians are this angry, you have to rewind to one night that changed everything. Last October, a fleet of more than 40 civilian boats called the Global Sumud Flotilla sailed toward Gaza carrying food and medicine. On board, around 500 people, doctors, lawyers, journalists, parliamentarians, including roughly 40 Italians, some of them elected members of parliament. Israeli naval forces intercepted those boats in international waters and detained more than 400 people. Israel says the flotilla was trying to breach a legal naval blockade, and that activists were offered other channels to deliver the aid. But for millions of Italians watching their own citizens, their own elected representatives, being taken off civilian boats at sea by a foreign military, the legal debate didn't matter. It felt personal. Within hours, Italy exploded. Protesters shut down the main train station in Naples. Police ringed Rome's Termini station. The CGIL union called it, quote, an extremely serious matter, and launched a general strike. Hundreds of thousands marched. Students occupied universities, and the slogan, Blocchiamo tutto, was born. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni dismissed it all. She said the flotilla and the strikes would do nothing to help Palestinians. The streets answered by getting bigger. But here's where the story takes the turn that almost no one outside Italy is connecting, because the flotilla was the spark. Lebanon is the fuel. You were probably told there's a ceasefire in Lebanon. There is, on paper. Just days ago, the United States brokered a brand new agreement between Israel and Lebanon. So the war is over, right? Listen to what's actually happened since. The day after that deal was announced, Israeli warplanes and drones struck towns across southern Lebanon. Lebanese state media reported at least 12 people killed in a single day, including a doctor. Strikes hit near a hospital. New evacuation orders forced more families from their homes. Days later, a strike in the city of Tyre killed 5 people and wounded 8. Lebanon's health ministry says 4 of the wounded were paramedics, hit close to a Red Cross center. Then Beirut itself, an airstrike on a densely packed residential neighborhood in the southern suburbs, 2 apartments and 2 buildings, at least 2 dead. That's not history, that's this week. And it sits on top of something even darker. Back in April, right after a ceasefire was announced in the wider war with Iran, Israel launched what it called its most powerful attacks ever on Lebanon, Operation Eternal Darkness. 100 airstrikes, many in densely populated areas. Lebanese authorities counted at least 357 people killed. Israel says they were Hezbollah fighters, 250 militants by its own count. But over 20 countries condemned the strikes, and the BBC reported that even the military gains were, quote, likely to be limited. Now I want you to sit with one number, just one. According to the United Nations, Israeli forces have committed more than 10,000 air and ground violations of the ceasefire in Lebanon since it was signed in late 2024. 10,000. Say the word ceasefire out loud, and then say 10,000 violations, and ask yourself if those two things can describe the same reality. Now, in fairness, here is Israel's side because you deserve the full picture. Israel says every operation targets Hezbollah, its weapons depots, its commanders, its rocket infrastructure. It points out that Hezbollah fired on Israel first in this latest round after the Iran war began, and that Hezbollah rejected the new ceasefire deal outright. Israel argues it cannot allow an armed militia to rebuild on its northern border, and that this is self-defense. But critics, including UN human rights monitors, humanitarian groups, and now even governments allied with Israel, ask a hard question back. If this is a war on Hezbollah, why are paramedics being wounded in Tyre? Why are apartment buildings in Beirut being hit? Why are hundreds of thousands of Lebanese civilians displaced from homes they still can't return to? Under international law, self-defense has to be proportionate and necessary. More and more of the world is openly saying this doesn't qualify. And one of the countries saying it loudest, Italy. This is the part of the story that turned Italian anger from solidarity into something personal. And if you only remember one thing from this video, make it this. Italy has troops in Lebanon, real soldiers, serving as UN peacekeepers along the border. And this spring, Israeli forces fired warning shots at a convoy of Italian UN peacekeepers, damaging one of their vehicles. Italian soldiers, under the UN flag, fired on. Rome summoned Israel's ambassador in protest. Then Italy's foreign minister, Antonio Tajani, a senior member of Meloni's own right-wing government, not some radical, flew to Beirut and publicly condemned what he called Israel's, quote, unacceptable attacks on civilians in Lebanon. Israel hit back by summoning Italy's ambassador. Think about what that means. The Italian government and the Italian street barely agree on anything. But on this, the dock worker in Genoa and the foreign minister in Rome are now saying versions of the same sentence. When that happens in a democracy, policy eventually moves. The protesters know it. That's why they're not letting up, and they're getting smarter. This is no longer just marching. It's forensic. At the giant southern port of Gioia Tauro, one of the busiest in the Mediterranean, activists launched a campaign called Global Intifada Disarm. They don't just wave flags, they track individual containers, they work with watchdog groups that monitor ship movements and cargo manifests, hunting for so-called dual-use materials, goods that look civilian on paper but can feed a war machine. And it's working. After activists raised the alarm, Italy's own finance police and customs agency physically inspected 8 suspect containers at the port and launched a formal investigation into whether the cargo was military. Ordinary citizens forcing the state to open the boxes. That's a new kind of power. In Livorno, protesters even managed something nobody thought possible. They blocked a U.S.-flagged military supply ship, one that had just loaded cargo at an Israeli port, from delivering to the American base at Camp Darby. Reporters noted it was the first time in 80 years that civilian protest had disrupted that base's logistics. And Meloni, she's trapped, squeezed between Washington and Tel Aviv on one side, and her own foreign minister, her own unions, her own streets on the other. Every new strike on Lebanon tightens that vice. So where does this go? Watch three things. 1. The ports. If the blockades hold and spread, and they already jumped to 20-plus ports in 4 countries, Europe's role in this war's supply chain gets genuinely complicated. 2. The Lebanon ceasefire. Hezbollah rejected the deal. Israel says strikes will continue. If the bombing keeps going, every single strike is fresh fuel for the streets of Genoa, Rome, Naples, Milan. 3. The governments. Italy's foreign minister has already broken ranks rhetorically. The question is whether words become policy, arms restrictions, trade reviews, votes at the UN. Because here is the pattern underneath everything you've heard today. When institutions stall, people improvise. If parliaments won't debate the arms trade, dock workers will inspect it one container at a time. If diplomats won't demand accountability, students will fill the squares until someone does. You can call that chaos. The people doing it call it conscience. History will decide who was right, but history is clearly being written in those ports right now. We'll be tracking every blockade, every strike, every violation, and every official statement from all sides as this unfolds. If you made it this far, you're exactly the kind of viewer this channel exists for, so do 2 quick things. First, subscribe and tap the bell because this story is moving daily and you don't want to catch it 3 weeks late from someone else's recap. Second, and this is the one I really want, answer me this in the comments. The dock workers of Italy are breaking no-strike norms, defying their own government, and costing shipping companies millions because they believe stopping cargo can stop a war. So tell me, is this what real democracy looks like, or is this going too far? One word is enough. Type strike if you think the workers are right. Type stop if you think they've crossed the line. I read the comments on every video, and I'll feature the sharpest arguments from both sides in the follow-up. Until next time, stay sharp, stay questioning, and above all, stay human. Peace.